Welcome to A Free Solution. I'm Kevin Wilson today, joined by Tim, the Freedom Variant O'Connor.
I'm here, Kevin. How you doing, buddy?
Oh, living the dream, Tim. Living the dream.
Yeah.
Um,
We're not we're pre-recording right now, right? We're just open kind of discussion.
yeah, open discussion right now. So we're
Okay.
going to be doing an evergreen show for you folks out there. Um, trying to do a bigger topic, talking about Social Security. And Tim, Status Tim here, is going to be defending Social Security from a
I
libertarian perspective.
I do. I got like a little introduction that I've worked up in my head as to why I'm willing to take the stance that libertarians should, could, or ought to be willing to talk about Social Security from a more um yeah, a more sympathetic perspective to the human beings that are taking a look at it.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, I'm interested to see what you have to say here. I'm skeptical of the whole system, and I'm gonna propose some alternatives here. Um,
Yeah.
and because I think they're like, okay, if we want an old age system of making sure people have enough, there are different ways of doing it than what we have now.
I
A
I
few
am
different opportunities.
certainly I am certainly amenable to improvements to our given system, and I think that, and I'll save it for the show, but I think I've got some points to make that um, libertarians should try to listen to, because I know, but I've been where you are, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, so we'll dig into it, and like we already some folks having some strong feelings on it. Legacy Right on Facebook says Social Security makes the young born into perpetual debt, paying for the old. Fuck that socialist BS.
Yeah, look, the issue is that I don't disagree with that sentiment, but that is not how you win friends and influence people, bro.
Yeah,
Like that's
right. So I mean,
that's
like, because you're talking a little bit about like both an empathetic and a political perspective, so we're gonna get into that.
yeah.
Um, Other Facebook user says perhaps our government should start by paying back the fund pool without printing it. Yep, we can talk about that too and
I
what's
do have
actually
yeah, I
going on
have some
there.
points on that a little bit. There's some valid discussions in there. Certainly, man, the present value of money, which is a complicated subject to talk about on um a radio show without being a policy nerd, and I don't know that I'll be able to either
This is the policy nerd show. We it is our mission to educate folks on libertarian values here and libertarian solutions. So Tim,
yeah.
we're gonna have to try.
We're gonna have to yes, we're gonna have to try. I do have some what I think are interesting topics of discussion, especially when it comes to um well, let's do it live. Let's get
Yeah, no,
into
all
it.
right. We'll get into it. And appreciate y'all starting off with strong comments already.
Oh
And
yeah.
we're gonna get to. We're gonna have this discussion. Put up a good evergreen show. So we're gonna go back in about 5 seconds.
Now, an hour of clarity for exhausted people of our nation mired in toxic partisanship. Left versus right, us versus them. While we pay to keep our politicians fighting, how do we, the people, rise up and solve the great challenges of our time? We do it by embracing freedom and liberty. There may be no such thing as a free lunch, but this hour is as close as it gets. Welcome to A Free Solution.
Welcome to A Free Solution. I'm Kevin Wilson today, joined by Tim, the Freedom Variant O'Connor.
I'm here, Kevin, and I'm here to preach about an issue that us libertarians, Kevin, I think that we're missing an opportunity to collaborate with society just a little bit better. I know we're kind of autistic, and I know we're
Collaborate
kind of
with
policy nerds,
society.
and I
What
know
are you gonna do, Tim? What?
once again I'm defending. Well, not exactly defending, but on some level, I want to make the case that our discussions around Social Security need to be more empathetic, need to be more recognizing of an inferred, implied, and forced contract that people have been,
Uh-huh.
maligned into, that have been abused into. And I think we've got to have that conversation. We've got to reach out to people. We have to come up with creative solutions and recognize that people that we want to help us achieve power, unironically, need to hear better messaging from us as libertarians. So,
All right. So that's a very winded way of saying that Tim's going to defend Social Security because it's politically advantageous. So Tim, start laying out. Tim
whoa.
Big Gov O'Connor is going to lay out the case for saving Social Security.
That was well played, Kevin. That was
I-
well played. You're
no,
casting
that was a bit harsh.
early.
That was a bit harsh. But you, to give them more generous interpretation, you think that like there's a lot of people who've grown to understand Social Security as commitment, and that it's worthwhile to talk about that in an empathetic way because it's a system that we have had around for decades, and people understand that they are going to be at least somewhat dependent on that, right?
That it has played a big role in almost everyone's style of retirement planning. Okay, like regardless of how successful you are, you know that at some point in your life, Social Security checks are going to be coming to you.
Yeah, and to be fair, selfishly, like when libertarians are like, and I'm gonna say this and make the case for it when we say Social Security is a Ponzi scheme and we need to like find a way to get rid of it or privatize it. Like to a lot of folks, that sounds like uh you know at best like uncaring, and
Yeah,
at worst dangerous, right? That
that-
like the
yeah,
way most people hear that, including a lot of Republicans now who used to be, I think, a little bit more in favor of like sensible like spending policy, but like now they have kind of gone on the full like we're going to save Social Security no matter what train. A lot of Republicans now, a lot of folks listen to the show on WYSL. I'm like, no, don't take away my Social Security. Donald Trump promised that like he's going to save our Social Security from Joe Biden, right? And Joe
yeah,
Biden promised the same thing. He promised he's going to save Social Security from Donald Trump. They're both major parties are accusing each other of wanting to destroy Social Security.
yeah.
And so
Look,
we'll get into like how the main two parties kind of propose to save this, and then what some
yeah.
alternative solutions are for this.
I have as usual, because I'm older, as is already being pointed out in the comments. I have a little history subject for you guys about this. Going back to the Bill Clinton administration and Newt Gingrich and the balanced budget deal. Newt Gingrich, a conservative icon who still was never really all that conservative, but and that's one of the problems with the GOP that I've mentioned on other shows. They're not they court conservatives, but they really end up conserving big government programs. But Newt Gingrich had laid out what was an interesting possible solution in a retirement savings plan. And the retirement savings plan, and like one of his sales pitches was that it would eventually cause Social Security to wither and die on the vine. And that is one of my earliest memories of the blue team seizing a narrative and saying that, changing what Newt Gingrich said to Newt Gingrich wants senior citizens to wither and die on the vine. And it was incredibly successful. It was totally mentally abusive, and it was completely wrong, and it was fear mongering. It was lie based, and it was a dangerous, dangerous, dangerous narrative that was unsuccessful because as a young man, wanted a young man seeing my potential earnings growing in the future, wanted a retirement plan that did not rely on the government. The fact that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme, we knew that then. We were ready for a better solution that gave us more autonomy over our forced retirement savings. And that's
Right.
how Social
Yeah.
Security has
And then
always been presented.
and Tim, to your point, like our government and anyone who like has been willing to crunch numbers on this has known that Social Security was going to be insolvent for decades. We've been talking about the 2030 number like for a while, right? It's kind of gone like back and forth a little bit, but like now it's on the doorstep. 2030, it's not far away. It's 6 years from now when Social Security is going to start to become insolvent. And you threw out both of us threw out the Ponzi scheme word. And let me just give some context to like why people make that argument, right? Just like the fundamental insustainability of Social Security is that most older folks, because people live longer, and just because of like different like monetary policy and stuff like that too, you tend to extract more nowadays than you have put in, right? And so what it now relies on is newer people, younger people to feed that system in order to make sure that the benefits older retired Americans who are receiving Social Security benefits are able to continue getting that defined benefit government pension, right? Like that's what it is. And so why that looks like a Ponzi scheme is that's how Ponzi schemes work, right? The people who first invest in, they get their money back and then some. And then it requires new people to keep feeding that system in order for the people in the front to get that benefit from that system. But inevitably, you're going to have more people receiving benefits than people who are willing or able to pay in. And that's the point we're arriving at with Social Security, is that there aren't enough young people to sustain the continued payments in perpetuity for older Americans who now require more money and are living longer than they were when Social Security was first built in the 1930s, when the average age was the average age American died was a lot lower.
Correct. The retirement age was lower then too, though. Just so like it was, I think 58 back then, and the goal of Social Security was, in a sense, to stimulate new workers to enter the workforce by asking older workers to retire. So there was an agreement that it was a Ponzi scheme that benefited society back then. Now, I think that one of the
I'm pretty
areas.
sure it was always 65 though. The
Look,
original
I'll make stuff
retirement age.
up to enhance my argument, Kevin, and that's
Oh,
just the
great!
way it's
It's
going to be.
perfect for politics.
Yeah. So one of the points that I want to make is that the government, regardless of the reality of Social Security, has made a promise to provide a retirement for the American working class. That with we as libertarians, we believe in contractual law. Now, whether a court has ruled that this contract is valid or that this contract actually exists or not is irrelevant to the average American who has heard promise after promise from politician after politician, Republican and Democrat alike, that Social Security is going to be there for them in return for the tax money that they paid in. So where we lose it is being eggheaded about it, right? Where we're saying we have to get rid of Social Security. We have to get rid of human beings' rights to something that they purchased from the government. And everybody's looking at the imaginary economic numbers that the government uses. And when we spend $6 trillion more than we take in, when we borrow $6 trillion a year or $2 trillion a year, depending on what year it is, there's a real issue that money becomes, I want to say, no longer real, but the promise of Social Security still remains in people's heads. It's a current thing, right? Like,
Right.
so
Well, I mean, and that's it's kind of how that system was built, right? Like the concept behind Social Security was, I mean, it was a bit of a cynical political ploy too, right? Like, we'll be
absolutely.
realistic about it. Is FDR wanted to make sure he could buy the loyalty of the Democratic base and ultimately the entire American voting base, but also, like I don't know, like the idea behind it was that you create an entitlement for everybody. So sort of like the old age, like UBI, right? Like everybody gets the same thing. You all pay into it a certain amount. You all essentially get the same amount out of it. It's not quite that way, but like that's the idea: is you pay into it, you get out of it. Rich, poor, whatever, everyone gets that benefit. And you don't want to means test it, because if you do that, then it just becomes a welfare program. And they thought that that would be more politically vulnerable. And Democrats still talk about it like this. They said, if we made it means tested at all, which is one of the solutions you could do, then it becomes politically vulnerable. And therefore, you have now broken your promise to folks who have paid in expecting to get something out of it, as if it were like a 401k or something. But it doesn't work like that. It's not a 401k. It's not that.
It would be better if it was, right? Like
Well,
that's
we're going to
the
talk about
thing.
that.
Yeah, so that was where Newt Gingrich was trying to go, was a forced retirement savings kind of concept, whereby people build value. They would be able to use it for home purchases. They would be able to use it for college funding. They would be able to use it for retraining yourselves, and you would have to pay it back. Like,
Right.
I'm
And I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that, but in the last segment, because
okay.
there's other countries that have done this too, and we're going to talk about that.
Okay.
So I mean, let's just keep talking about like the contract side, right? Like, because that's
Sure.
I get the argument that you're making, right? Like, people had this expectation, this promise from government, right? If the government said, "I'm going to give you this amount of money at this age, if you pay taxes and do everything you're supposed to," and again, like, you can check, like, right now, any age, if you're working, you could check how much you paid in Social Security and what your expected benefit would be and all that stuff. They're telling you, like, they act like it is a 401k type of thing, right?
Correct.
They act
Yeah,
like it,
they
like you're paying
certainly
into
do.
this pool, but like really it doesn't. Like, you're just paying it to government, and like the government saying we pinky promise to like give you this money eventually. But like all defined benefit systems, like pensions run in this, both corporate and government run pensions, is that again, if one of a couple things happen, either like you overpromise, like you're not able to deliver on those benefits based on new revenue coming in, or is mismanaged or borrowed from too much,
Yeah.
then you end up running into problems. And that's why, like, government to me, like, yeah, you're right. Government should keep its promise. However, it's already fundamentally broken its promise, and it hasn't taken any concrete steps to do things to rectify that. Right? The government could have absolutely done stuff to fix this, even within the context of a defined benefit system, decades ago. Decades ago, they could have done something about it. And the longer they wait, the worse it's going to get.
And look, these guys made it sound like they did do things, okay? Like they did turn it into a defined benefit program, that there's a Social Security lock box that exists. That's the current zeitgeist on Social Security. That's what 60% of the population believes about Social Security. Now, excuse me, guys, the reality is legally that may not be true, but as libertarians, there is enough evidence for us to argue that that contract does in fact exist. Like that the government has paid has created this contract, that has created what's called an implied contract. And sure,
Right.
did anyone who paid in sign that contract?
That's a
Like
Facebook
that,
comment. Someone asked that directly. Yeah, like
right?
that. I mean, sort of like you kind of it's one of those things where like when you sign up to, I mean, you get a social security card when you're little, and when you sign up for employment, you pay your taxes. Like that's how, like, they say, like, oh, you've agreed to do that because you've participated in society, and your employer is going to like give part of your paycheck to this, right?
Yeah, I
And
mean,
so
look,
and then you give us some money, we promise to give you some money later.
yeah, the argument is persuasive, but also the reality is that regardless of whether or not you signed that contract, you were forced into this contract where the government says, yes, we forced you into this contract, but now we're not necessarily obligated to make good on
Right.
the contract. And that, to me, is a real opportunity to criticize the government and hold it accountable.
Yeah, shocking,
Um,
Tim. When has government ever failed to deliver on their contracts, promises, and treaties? My goodness.
Nearly every single time they make promises that they can't keep. They write their body writes checks that their mouth can't cash, or some sort of nonsense like that. I think I got it all backwards, but it doesn't
Flipping
matter.
it around, but yeah.
I, but you know what I mean? Like, the government talks a lot of crap, makes a lot of promises that people then like make life decisions, plan their lives around. And so at some point, Kevin, I did run some numbers about whether people do pay in more to Social Security than what they take out from Social Security. And I think that the results are kind of interesting. And certainly they're going to be a little bit ambiguous. And certainly there's going to be an issue of them being open to interpretation. But I don't know, would this segment be a good time, or should we save that for segment 2?
I mean, we have like 4 minutes left. We could probably talk about that.
All right. So let's just for example, I ran a basically a saving investing calculator that assumes a 4% rate of return, which is about the historical average. And based on, you know, an initial contribution balance of $2,500, it's just kind of how the calculator works. But on some level, you have to have a 0 point, and then about an approximate $250 monthly contribution, and then assuming an expected annual return of 4%, you would, if, and this is where it gets a little bit gray, but if I'm 20 years old and I work till age 67, that's 47 years of a contribution, right?
Mhm.
My final balance based on all of those assumptions would be a retirement account with $431,000 in it. Now, $431,000 doesn't necessarily sound like a lot of money, but if you say you're going to live to be 77, you're going to get 12 payouts a year. That gives you about 10 years, about 120 payouts. You get from Social Security, the average check is about $1,700. So just to do that simple math, 120 times 1,700 is $204,000. So you can see that there's a substantial amount of theft going on there that makes that contract, that promise of the contract, something valuable to enforce against the government because they are actually making money on it if they were to be responsible with it and not spend it foolishly. How's that sound? We got
Right.
to add a lot of caveats there, right?
No, I mean, well, there's a lot of that, right? It's in like the bottom line too is that like despite the fact that I talked about like the Ponzi scheme thing, like you were probably making less off of like what you'd receive from Social Security retirement with the government, and you are also at their whim. They decide if they are going to increase your benefits and how much like they're adjusting for inflation, things like that. You're sort of at their whim at that, than you would in the private market, right?
Yeah. So
Um,
here's a comment from Facebook user. Don't forget about inflation in that equation. Okay, correct. But inflation is on both sides of that equation. Okay. So it's
right.
on the contribution equation and the rate of return equation. And it's also on your defined benefit payout. So at some point, I can't control for every variable and make it interesting enough for people to understand. But what I'm saying is there's a substantial amount of value to your Social Security contributions that is being soaked up by the government.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
No, yeah, that is what it is, and again, it's not like it's all being, like, turned into cash and put in a vault either, like, the government's doing different things with it.
The
Um,
government is loaning it to itself, which is hilarious because the only way they can afford the interest on loaning it to itself is by through taxation of the income tax, right? Use of the income tax to pay the interest on the Social Security money. It's literally that to me is insane. Like there's no benefit there. Like I have lots of criticisms of Social Security, and I think that it's an absolutely flawed system. But if we do not recognize that when we're talking to human beings outside of the libertarian construct, we need to find common ground with them. And
yeah,
I think
that
enforcing an implied contract is fine. And somebody said in the comments, it's a contract signed under duress. Absolutely, which
yeah,
makes it more enforceable against a person that forced you to sign it when it's to your benefit. And it should allow you out of that contract if you don't want to participate. Like those are the things. Like, yes, it is a contract made under duress. That gives us the right to opt out or to enforce it against the aggressor. That's contract law. Arguably, I took business law when I went to college, so
right, yeah,
I'm
well,
gonna
it's yeah,
make
people
bold
should deliver in
statements.
that. But we are out of time for this segment. Thanks again for joining us here on A Free Solution on WYSL. We're gonna be back in just a few minutes. Talk to you soon. Alright. Well, Tim, I don't think I wanna spend too much time in the break. I think we should just jump right back into this, and
Okay.
if we have more to say after, we can do it in the after show, and people could jump in there, but I think we're on a roll, and we can jump into, a few more issues, that we have.
Yeah.
Uh,
I wouldn't mind jumping into like a little bit a part of a segment about how the gun control system in Israel it is under discussed as a what it could have meant to a preventative measure for the October 7th abuse. If we want to change subjects,
no, well, we're gonna stick to Social Security. I think we could
all
do
right,
a full show out of it. We could save that for another show. Um,
all right, fair enough,
so
Kevin.
yeah, I think we have a full show out of this.
Okay,
Um, so we'll go back in about 10 seconds. Love the comments, bunch of good stuff in there, and I do want to address like the age thing a little bit more directly too. All right, so let's head back in 5, 4, 3, 2. Welcome back to A Free Solution. I'm Kevin Willis today, joined by Tim, the Freedom Variant O'Connor.
I'm here, Kevin, and I am taking the controversial libertarian position that we should protect Social Security.
Yeah, and so someone had asked this question earlier that noting, Tim, that you are a little bit older than I am. I'm currently 33, and I know some folks who are even younger to that listen to this are just thinking like, I'm not even going to pretend that the government's going to deliver on this contract, right? And they see, other old age pension systems from governments, and here in Rochester too, from corporations collapse because, like, again, the system itself was fundamentally unsustainable. So a lot of people my age, and even probably like anyone like 40, 45 and younger, just assume like, I'm not going to get this. So the sooner we can rip off the Band-Aid, the better. The people older than that, people your age, they're like, man, I have so much sunk cost into this. Like, of course I need to get my benefit out of it. But like to younger folks, and 33 being what it is, like sort of young, we're like, no, this is a bad deal, and we need to get out of this deal as soon as possible. So, Tim, do you have any response to like that, like the age gap? And we'll also add too, by the way, because this is functionally a Ponzi scheme. Older people tend to be wealthier too. Like just in general, people who are older tend to have more means to support themselves. It's not universal. I know it's not universal, but like older people tend to be wealthier than the younger people who are going to have to subsidize eventually, assuming that the solutions go the way they're probably going to go. We're going to have to subsidize Social Security retirement for older folks.
Yeah. Now, so look, I think your points are what I would call valid, and I would also call them important. But I would also say that from a libertarian perspective, we're not going to win friends and influence people when we say that.
You win younger friends, just
that?
not older friends. Like the folks who vote, who are 65 plus. Yeah, they hear that and like, no, whatever. Like, why you as a libertarian just taking my stuff away? But like, this is not even a libertarian position. This is like a younger people position who are like, I'm not going to get this unless you fix it. The system's going to be broken in a decade. So like, and then why should I have to subsidize some of the wealthiest Americans? Like this is like a Democrat, like younger Democrat talking point sometimes.
Oh, well, fair enough, right? Like, so certainly there would be interim solutions that I'm absolutely amenable to, but the political system would not, Kevin, because it could end up destroying the system. And we alluded to it, we referred to it in our earlier segment, but where we start a means testing program where if you have $500,000 worth of assets already, or you have a fully funded Roth IRA that has over $200,000 in it, the likelihood that the extra $1,700 is going to make a real impact in your life is zero. But if we allow people to opt out from paying in and getting money back out, then that crushes the system. Now, I'm in favor
if we do that though, like I don't think the system will be sustainable because this is something that's happening in Europe, right? Like, so again, people my age, like if I could opt out of Social Security right now and divert all that money to like an index fund somewhere, I would do it in an instant, right? Like I absolutely 100%, I would sign up for that on day one.
Yeah.
The problem is right now is that there are more people expecting payments, even when everyone's forced to pay it in, than there are people who can pay in, right? So that's the fundamental problem. So if younger people who are going to be working another, 10, 20, 30, 40 years are opting out, there will not be enough funds for the people who are already receiving Social Security benefits to get benefits from that system. And again, why would you stay in that system when you're getting less of a return, and we're worried correctly that we're not going to ever see that return, and it's just going to go to subsidize people who are older?
So to avoid your specific question, but to present a possible argument to that position, is that the promise and the implied contract of Social Security could be a tool and a wedge to force the government into some sort of sustainable fiscal responsibility whereby they stop creating programs that are making us broke. Okay. So arguably, to hold the government accountable would be to cause them to become more fiscally responsible, to understand that funding foreign wars and proxy wars all over the world, to blowing up wealth over oceans and bombing brown people is a completely uh, inappropriate thing to do for a number of reasons. And one of those reasons is because we made an implied contract with the citizens of the United States and we compelled them to pay their money. Like we compelled them to, we took their money under penalty of, being locked in a cage in a typical libertarian, talking point.
That's the signed under duress type of thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you don't pay your taxes when you get employment or you're an independent contractor or whatever, they will throw you in a cage eventually if you don't pay that stuff.
Yeah. So we have to use it as a lever to force fiscal responsibility would be my answer, even though it doesn't answer our problem specifically. Like
I mean,
answers your critique specifically. I'm sorry.
no, I mean, like, that would be great, but I'm arguing that, like, absent everything else, so, like, the system is fundamentally unsustainable as is, right? Because how it's supposed to work, and I know it doesn't always work this way, but how it's supposed to work is it's supposed to be a self-contained system. Now, I know
Right.
people, Congress has borrowed in from the Social Security Trust Fund in the past, but like it actually has paid a bunch of that back.
Sure.
Um, but and that's like the how they get to that 2030 target is the paying it back part. Um, but like unless you're proposing that we stop spending elsewhere so we can subsidize this system more, in which case it's no longer self-sustainable. It's pulling from other types of taxes. Because Tim, what that sounds to me is like we probably have to raise taxes in order to pay for this.
Well, arguably, if we're in a situation to fund our current what the government calls our current responsibilities and obligations. We're already at a situation where if we don't raise taxes, the entire system is unsustainable. So
So, I
again,
mean,
I
Tim,
know
is
that
that
I'm
what you're
not
proposing?
answering with a winning point about your specific issue, but to educate people that aren't libertarians, I'm that's where I reside. Does that right? I'm
Yeah, maybe. I mean,
deflecting.
but like, because again, like if I'm coming at this as like a a Democrat or a Republican, I would just say like, okay, cool, like we can talk about fiscal responsibility, but how does that save this specific program that's supposed to be separate, right? Unless you're
By
just proposing
subsidizing it
raise
more.
taxes
Yeah,
and like subsidize this program more, which again, I would go back with why should I get taxed even more to subsidize your retirement?
look, that's a fair question, right? And so what's the way around it? Should you be taxed more? No. Should the government stop spending so much money and get to an area of fiscal responsibility where it can handle its obligations? Like, should we put a value on the government's real obligations? The government is the one that made the promise. And somehow I know that the government is us, but somehow we have to find a way to hold them accountable for this contract that doesn't
Yeah.
injure other people,
Yeah, so
doesn't.
to me, like, Tim, I feel like that's kind of a red herring, and right, and you're gonna end up inevitably, you're still gonna end up with what's happening in Europe, right? Like you have a population crisis over in Europe where you have like again, there's not enough young people paying into this system, and because like there are fewer younger people, it's happening in Japan as well. You have fewer younger people paying into the system. People are living longer. They're receiving benefits longer. It's
Yeah.
fundamentally unsustainable. So the only there are a couple ways that like we could fix it, right? And it's A, raise the retirement age,
Yep.
B, lower benefits, C, raise taxes, or D, do means testing, right?
Yeah.
And
And
that's like assuming that Social Security like maintains the defined benefit structure that it has now, right? So like let's just assume that for a moment. Those are really the only ways to fix this. It's really only four ways. I'm sure there are other like clever ways, but like those are the only ways that we're like I think are realistic and understandable in the short term.
so look, fair enough, right? I do recognize that there's flaws in my argument, and I do recognize that when it comes to the actual Social Security system and the fact that it is a Ponzi scheme, and that at some point it is going to have to be subsidized to maintain its current structure. I've always been in favor of means testing, and that's not to offer it as a distraction. But
Mhm.
what I'm saying is that Republicans and Democrats do not have the wherewithal for that because it will, in fact, like it will cause the system to wither and die on the vine, in the words of Newt Gingrich, right? Like that's the reality. It
Yeah.
will allow people to opt out of Social Security on a permanent basis. Like that's the legal problem of the contract. If they start doing means testing and not just entitle it, then it's no longer a social program. It is a defined benefit pay in, right? So
Right. Yeah, that it truly is actually a defined benefit program. And like, okay, you pay in, you get this money out. But again, most people I think are going to look at this and think it's a bad deal. And to the other point you started to make, and I'm going to bring up this Facebook user's comment. So there's no way to make such a system sustainable in today's political environment.
yeah,
And maybe that's so, but dang, like I've gone on this civic nationalism rant before, but like, my goodness, we have to expect Congress to be able to do hard things, right? Like that is how a republic needs to work. That's how a
correct.
constitutional republic needs to work. So like, yeah, I know, like we can be like, man, it stinks in today's political environment trying to get something done. But like the Republicans and Democrats know a crisis is looming on this. They know that they have to solve this problem. My goodness, I'm asking political leaders to like just get there, like to just like make sure they step up and be adults and find a solution to this, because like it's necessary, like because the collapse is going to be so much worse than whatever solutions, painful solutions even, are going to be proposed in this. Like that's like, it's so much worse if suddenly like social security checks can't go out, right? And then you don't exactly know like who's going to be hurt by this. So like, yeah, I'm actually, if we stay within the structure of this, like I'm fine with means testing, because it is silly to me, as you said, that for someone who has several $1,000,000 in assets to get a $1,700 social security check, like what does that matter to them? It doesn't at all. Like,
No, and I think that we could travel way further down than several $1,000,000 in assets, right? Like
right,
we
yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, I'm picking like the top one, but like again, I said it before, like older people tend to be a bit wealthier, right? Like, like it hurts having money taken out at my age a lot more, which is, sort of why like it's tough for younger people to save for retirements. And we're going to talk about some of that in a little bit, but like it hurts a lot more to then have that money go in subsidizing someone who absolutely doesn't need it, who would not miss that check at all. Now I get, and that's why like means testing is fine to me, because I get there's some people I even know and I care about and I love who get that social security check and like, man, they would not be able to pay their bills without it. I get it. Right. And
yeah.
so like because I think you have a good point when you say like libertarians can't just like be like, that's a Ponzi scheme, abolish social security, like be done with it, because it scares the crap out of some people, because some people you hear that and you think like, oh, these people want to just like take away this dollar amount that's my difference between being able to keep my home or not, to put
Yeah.
food on my table or not. So like
Yeah.
we have to be empathetic. So like I think there must be ways to kind of honor that contract. It's not going to be done in the structure that we have now. Like it has to change. Otherwise, like those people are going to be even more in trouble.
You are making a very powerful argument for means testing. Like that is probably the first order of business. Like that I think society would be ready to hear from libertarians, where libertarians are saying, look, we understand that this was a contract, but some of you have accumulated a lot of assets. Some of you have like no foreseeable problem with your retirement package. Okay. But a means testing creates an obligation where people who already have plenty of money do not need Social Security money.
Yeah.
And that would, I think
I
we
get
could
it,
get
but
where it would substantially lower the payout responsibilities.
yeah, and I get it. And the response from this, and it's probably going to come from like more of the Republican side, is this: what's the difference between this and like soak the rich taxation? This is you're just confiscating wealth, essentially. You're just saying like, hey, look, I paid into this. I was promised to get money out of it, and you're just confiscating that money to distribute to poor people. Like you have broke your promise.
Absolutely. I agree with them, but that's a reality too, right? Like that yes, the whole thing is a promise that has been broken in a way, based on the campaign rhetoric used, the promises made by representatives of our government. Those promises have been made. On some level, it's been delivered upon. So the people who have been already stolen from have some rights, right? So it's an interesting argument. I think that means testing would be the first accessible and realistic way that people would I say acceptable even, right? People would be like, all right, means
Yeah.
testing, we've got to kind of accept that as a
Yeah.
reality. They would accept
Well,
that before they accept raising the retirement age drastically.
yeah, maybe. Well, we do have to head to break. We'll talk about a few more of those solutions and some other ones as well. Thanks again for joining us here on A Free Solution on WYSL. We'll be back in just a few. I know,
Yeah,
Tim.
I mean,
think same thing. We jump.
contractually, go ahead. I'm sorry, Kevin.
I was gonna say, I think same thing, Tim. We just jump right into the next segment.
Okay.
You,
Yeah, you're on fire here. You've got a lot of pushback against my point, and I like it. And then it kind of furthers the narrative of we're recognizing the reality of we don't have a way to reach on Social Security. We don't have a way to reach the broad spectrum of Democrats and Republicans, and we've got to find a way to do that.
Yeah, we should, because again, they're both running on. We got to save it.
Yeah, yeah, and they will. You know, I do have a joke I'm going to work into. I think you'll appreciate it.
Oh, great. So, all right, we'll head back in about 10 seconds, and we'll keep talking about this. Back in 5. Welcome back to A Free Solution. I'm Kevin Wilson today, joined by Tim, the Freedom Marion O'Connor, and we're talking Social Security today, and talk about some of the potential solutions here.
Yeah, I've got two potential solutions, Kevin, that I think could in fact save Social Security. Workplace environments have become entirely too safe. Okay. And if we were to eliminate more younger workers through okay, that's a bad one.
Okay. Yeah. Tim's solution is if we just kill the young.
Well, that's very libertarian, right? Like, hey, your employer offers you a place to work. You decide whether it's safe enough for you to work and make your own decisions. There's an assumption of risk, and it's on you. Also, guys, that's just a joke.
Yeah.
But that is a problem with Social Security, is that people are actually living longer and surviving to retirement age more often. The other thing is that if we got back to having more children, we like instead of like we're down below like 1.6 for every 2 people that reproduce. Like we're our replacement rate is too low.
That's what the Europeans like. All right, listen. We recognize this is a Ponzi scheme, and you know what we need? We need more suckers.
Victims.
Yes. So just have more babies so they can pay into the system so you people can continue to mooch off the young. Like that's the solution. Like legitimately, like Europe, Japan, that's what they're trying to do. Like, please guys, just have more babies so that we are able to sustain this Ponzi scheme that we built.
I think if we lowered the percentage of narcissists in our society somehow through like compelled education about narcissism and how it's bad, and that how having children is actually beneficial to older people so that we have a workforce to parasite off of, I think that would be a successful strategy. I think that the libertarians could sell that.
There we go. So that's certainly an option. And like population decline is real, and it's actually it's actually a problem for not just this reason. Actually, it's a problem for like some other reasons as well. Just because it's not just like paying into a system, it's also like, okay, who takes care of everyone when they're 70 years old and they need some help for the next 30 years, right? Like it's a legitimate problem. Unless you're like, a senator or something, in which case like you're good.
Yeah. It was a legitimate societal strategy back, in the 1800s, where you're growing a farm and growing your family at the same time so that your farm can be more effectively managed with more hands, right? So we've kind of lost that as a society. Arguably, an influx of workers, low wage, minimum wage workers, could in fact benefit Social Security. So I'll turn it over to you to advocate for immigration.
I mean, that's a legitimate thing. People are saying, hey, we want to save Social Security, just import a bunch of young immigrants and they're going to pay into the system. So
and a lot of them don't even get tax returns at all. So like
a lot of them are paying into the system without actually being able to benefit from Social Security.
Yeah, it's a 100% contribution. But we still managed to spend $6 trillion, who knows? The government still manages to spend $6 trillion, and we still run up our national debt at over $1 trillion a year. So
Yeah.
at some point, we have to fix that, or nothing
Yeah.
is going to get fixed.
Yeah, in addition to all the other stuff that the government's doing, it's not just Social Security; it's kind of everything. But let's take a moment to talk about. I think one of the solutions that we actually would be more on the libertarian side, right? That's
Okay.
something that we should talk about more, and actually want to talk about the libertarian paradise of Australia.
Whoa,
Of all
whoa, whoa!
places, I
Hold
know,
up,
right?
hold up a second. Like that didn't land right. I just want to
No,
make
right,
sure I
right.
heard you
Libertarian
correctly.
paradise. Oh, I'm sorry, but they do have a privatized Social Security system, like
Okay, fair
somewhat
enough.
privatized, right? So, and that's the funny part, right? It's like we talk about this as like, wow, you libertarians are wild for even like considering a privatized system of Social Security, but places like Australia do it, and there's several other like a couple of the Nordic countries do something similar where it's not paying into a defined benefit plan. It's like it's still a forced contribution, but it's a forced contribution to something like akin to a 401k in some places, or akin to like an IRA in other places. Like Chile does something like this. And every employer is required to take that out, right? And you put it into a fund. But the important part is that you manage that fund, like you own it. The government cannot touch it in theory, right? I mean, they could always grab
Right.
anything, but in theory, like you own that, can manage it, can decide if you want to take the penalty of withdrawing sooner, or shifting where the funds are, if it's an index fund, or you want to shift it into more securities, or you want to have it more in corporate bonds or treasuries, whatever. Like, you get to decide what that is. You still have to give a certain amount, but you own it. And
Yeah.
it's a system that Australia made the switch to, I think, like 40 years ago now. And they have to contribute something like 12% of their income to it, right?
Which is similar to what we're contributing, right? We're
Yeah.
we're at 12% for an average American employee, and 17 to 20% for a self-employed individual. So,
hmm
um, so
exactly.
yeah, so we're it's very similar. Like, I think 7% comes out of your average worker's paycheck, and then that's matched on some level by your employer. So nearly 50-50. So
Yeah.
it's a very similar contribution, right?
Yeah. And so there are ways of being able to do this, right? And like an acceptable solution to me, if like we decide that we want to get serious about saving for Social Security, is essentially you could say, okay, we are going to take like the amount that like you have put into this system, like because we know to the dollar how much has been put into this system, and we say, okay, we're going to just shift all of that into like a fund that you own, that you control part of, right? Just shift that to there.
Mhm.
And then the government from there is like, now it is yours. You can have a financial advisor, like anyone who has their, either was it Series 6 or Series 7, whatever it is, Series 7 maybe.
Yeah.
And you're able to do this. They're able to manage it on your behalf. You can manage it on your own. Whatever you want to do, it's yours now. Government has no more obligation here. And even if that would require some additional funding to make sure that that's squared up, I would be okay with that in order to fulfill a promise that was made. Okay, let's drain out the Social Security system, the fund that we have, transfer it into these accounts that the government no longer has anything to do with, and whatever the gap is, like pay that gap.
Arguably, that's very attractive, and I think that especially for even me, like I would love to have my a net payout, a lump sum payout of that on some level are my contributions of what I put into Social Security in a lump sum, or a fund that I control, that I can't, even if I couldn't take it out until after I'm 65, or there were penalties for withdrawing money from it, I would be
Yeah.
okay with that. Like, I saved a lot of money when I was younger, and I managed to buy a couple pieces of property. I think I would still make it under the means testing in the current system, right? But I would be okay with having more money to manage. I would be
Yeah.
okay with investing in my properties to achieve a rate of return, right? Like, I can take my own labor, my own money, and force multiply a return on that, right? So
Yeah.
I do like I
Right, and you should be able to, and
love
like,
ideas like that. Love them.
yeah, and like you should be able to do that, and like however you want to like use that money, like should be up to you, right? Like in systems like Australia, you're able to at a certain age take some of that money out penalty free. It's the same way, like there'd have to be some structure around it. Like, does it have a 401k type of thing where like you just pay tax on what you get out, even though this was already sort of paid in as tax? Is it considered post-tax income, pre-tax income? I'm not going to get into the details of what like necessarily makes sense here.
Yeah.
Just you know, I think like this direction would be good. Again, to me, if like I could take that money like that I put in right now and like put that into like an existing, 401k type system,
Yeah.
an index fund or whatever, right? Like it would make sense to me to be able to do that. And again, this Facebook user says, "How dare you suggest that which has worked before?" It has. Like other countries have already done this. This isn't even something new. This is an option that we've seen how it's worked. Like, the Australian system isn't exactly perfect too. There's still means testing as well. Like if you are unemployed for a while, there's still like low income assistance that's available to you. Like in the same way we would, I mean, there's a whole other conversation with like Medicaid that has to
Yeah.
take place as well. There's things
Sure.
like food stamps, like that is an additional thing we'd have to deal with. Like Social Security, would be there, and now the government can no longer touch it. They can no longer break a promise to you. You'd be able to do with that money what you want. And even if it were compelled, which is not exactly a libertarian solution, like forcing you to save,
Right.
it's a better alternative than what we have now. So that's my compromise position that takes into account like people still want to be able to keep their money. People feel like the government shouldn't like confiscate any of this if you're older and wealthier. And, you know, we're not totally leaving people high and dry either. Like you have to save into the system if you're working. And if you're not, then well, again, there's other ways of being able to get assistance right now to meet your basic needs as well. Which again, that is a separate conversation. I'm just talking about Social
Sure.
Security.
I've got a devil's advocate kind of question here for you, Kevin. Based on the fact that I like this concept. I've always liked this concept. It's not dissimilar to what was tried in 1992. But
Mhm.
your system is going to create some inherent wealth and retirement iniquities and inequalities. And the socialists and the communists in our society are going to have a problem with that. How is a libertarian going to sell your system when it's inevitable that at the end of the game there's going to be inequality and some people are going to starve because they didn't contribute enough money to their forced retirement savings? It's
I
painful,
mean,
right? Like
yeah, I
that,
mean,
that
I don't the tough part is like I don't really care about the opinion of communists.
sure. I don't
But
blame you. I'm just
and
saying.
so like my first reaction is to say something I can't say on radio about those folks, but
I'll say it.
um
No, I'm just kidding.
no,
Go ahead.
no, I gotta edit this. No, but like there's going to be inequalities. There are already inequalities with the system that we have now, right? Like it already
Massive.
exists. And like I think it's important to also set the expectation that you are responsible for your own retirement more, right? Like again, like people, I think there's a handful of people who like maybe aren't aware that like think like, oh, well, the government will take care of me in my old age and I'll be able to do that. It's really not enough to live on for like most people. Like it's really, really not. Set the expectation appropriately. You're responsible for building your own savings, and we're going to do this we're going to help you out
Yeah.
by like having you contribute to your own savings. And if you're really in destitution, there's still going to be other systems to be able to support you there. But in terms of like replacing that income in retirement, yeah, there's going to be some inequality there.
Well,
But
like
I'm okay. Like inequality doesn't necessarily bother me. Like I know some people are going to have less, some people are going to have more because like of different circumstances that led them to being able to live a more comfortable life. Like I just at the end of the day, like inequality doesn't bother me. Destitution bothers me, and I think it's worth doing something about that. But
yeah.
inequality does not bother me.
Right, and inequality doesn't bother me. I'm saying and I think you understand what I'm saying. I'm not actually challenging you, but that
Yeah, yeah.
the Democrat narrative, like, so let me just put it this way: just grab 60% of the Republicans and 7% of Team Blue with your potential solution there. But is that enough to make a change in the libertarian approach? Like, I think people need to wake up that our ideas are good, our ideas are sound, and our ideas are, that to me is compassionate to a broader spectrum of society. Like that, there's a
Yeah.
lot of compassion in a system like that.
Yeah, right. And again, like it's something where like the government can't suddenly say, you are now retiring at 70, right? It's your money. If you want to retire at 55, that is your choice. If you, whether or not you have enough money to do that, well, that's not the government's responsibility. That's your responsibility to make sure that like you are able to do that, right? And again, for people who are disabled, for people who cannot work, for people who are in real trouble, there are other systems to like deal with that specifically. But
Yeah.
for everyone else, like, yeah, man, like you work like as much as you need to work, but like you're responsible for having enough money for that.
No, I love that, and that is actually like a freedom-based solution, right? Like where with freedom there has to be accountability, right?
Yeah.
And that's the problem with the narratives being peddled by both the GOP and the DNC, that we can have freedom as defined by them with no accountability for our own
Yeah.
actions. And I think that
Asking people to take responsibility for their own lives is a virtue, and our government should do more of that.
yes, that's actually well said. I love it.
All right. And I think we're gonna have to actually end the show on that note, unfortunately, because I'm
Oh,
looking at
okay.
the time. We're running out of time. But thanks again, folks, for joining us here on A Free Solution. We'll probably continue for another few minutes after the show. So look up our podcast, A Free Solution, anywhere you find podcasts. Thank you, WYSL audience. Have a great night.
I wanted to get this up there during the radio show because I think it would have appealed to the WISL audience, and to me, right? Like, so
Yeah.
regardless of my position
Let's
in,
read it. Let's read
yeah,
it.
yeah, go on. Equality bothers me more because the only way a system has ever achieved it is to lower the bar, and I wanted the emphasis on system because that's what we have problems with. That's where the promises that the other teams are making. They're promising to reform a system that is inherently tyrannical, that is not offering more freedom. They're offering to use the system against their perceived enemies and thereby necessarily lowering everyone's freedom and everyone's accountability, regardless of which side the other team is advocating for. Like whatever. I think our libertarian audience gets that. I
Yeah.
don't think that the Republicans and the Democrats on any level at all understand that. They're like winning a game and then they're going to dunk on their enemies and probably even worse, right? Like at some level, some Democrats want to throw Trump supporters in re-education camps, and Trump supporters on some level are very willing to consider the possibility of throwing Democrats back to high school to relearn the Constitution and worship it as a religious document.
Yeah.
Like I think
Those
that
both just sound like re-education camps, Tim.
it's a version of re-education camp, regardless of how you look at it. Like they're both in favor on
Yeah.
some level, which on some level, like you guys all know, like I'm more sympathetic to real conservatives who recognize that the scope of smaller government could benefit everyone. But the conservatives now are like conserving the GOP, and it's like you guys are missing the big picture. You're missing the story here.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of it where again they're like conservatism ends up going back to that old definition of standing athwart history and yelling stop, right? And they just like keep kind of moving along, like, all right, we want to conserve the status quo as it is now. I'm like, I don't know, conservatives, like it sort of seems like the status quo is like fundamentally broken, and there are
Yeah.
different ways to like still have a conservative ethos while recognizing the reality of like necessary reform.
Well, right. One of the premises of conservatism was that they want to freely worship their religion and they want to be free from government encumbrances like high taxes and immoral wars. And yet somehow they've lost sight of the game there,
Right. Well, I mean, like, because conservatives like kind of like it depends on like what conservative intellectual tradition you're talking about. Like, but the conservative intellectual tradition that I sort of get, even though I don't always agree with, is like the preservation of like, what do they call them? Like little platoons. Am I thinking of the right word? The systems to build community and support around, right? So like
Correct.
churches, and like
Okay.
different, social institutions, like civic organizations, and like there are ways in which to build community support for one another that exist outside of dependency on government. That dependency on government can lead to systems that are toxic, that are unsustainable, and that wither the virtues of personal responsibility and hard work because you've developed a system that like creates dependence and entitlement.
Yeah, like for
Right.
example, Catholic Charities, guys, like they are
Right.
an NGO that collects millions and billions of dollars from the government all over the country and no longer adhere to the principles, their founding principles. Like they have moved way past them. And because they had the incentive, they were incentivized to take government money and therefore from a conservative religious perspective at the very least, corrupted. Um,
Mhm.
you know, arguably, like I don't want to say things too strongly, but I also want to be clear. I'm not sure that Catholic Charities is a bad organization per se. I'm saying that their original mission has been corrupted by providing local help to communities. I wanted to read that comment.
Oh, sorry. I thought you clicked that accidentally because we had
Oh no, it
I
was
think
this
we had
one.
said that one before.
This one. Children are free labor. We must breed more. I think that you got the basic premise I was offering. Correct.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah,
correct.
that's part of it. I don't know. My soon to be 3-year-old, it has not been super helpful in doing work around the house yet, but hopefully he
My
gets there.
Yeah, my 17-year-old is a great kid, but yeah, there's no matter what, and no matter how responsible your child is, and no matter how cool they are, there's always going to be that battle of this is how much you should do around the house, and this is how much, uh, you know. There's always
Yeah,
going to be that fight, always. So
right.
whatever.
No, that's part of it, but I don't know. I mean, on the other, let's say on the other Social Security stuff, I'm trying to think of like any other things that we missed. We talked about the high taxes, we talked about means testing, we talked about old age, and I feel like I had another thing on this,
We
but
covered the implied contract, and that sure,
yeah, we
it's a
covered it.
coerced contract. It's a contract made under duress. And I do think perhaps not. I think that I want people to understand that I don't disagree with any of the criticisms of the Ponzi scheme that is Social Security, but I think that on some level, populism demands solutions, and I think that discussing the Australian libertarian model was a great way to go. I do want to say that that's been on the table a number of times in the past,
Yeah.
and I was excited by that possibility, that
Yeah, and
premise.
politically, like it never seems to go through, right? And I don't think like we're in a political moment, unfortunately, where it will survive now, given that the geriatrics who run our parties are not inclined to implement the kind of change that could be
Well,
voice
dude,
more responsibility on them. Like again, I like the proposal that I built out, like not built out, like I suggested based on other models that have worked, like wouldn't necessarily take any money away from them, but it does bring responsibility back to them, right?
well, I don't think that our geriatric system, whether it be the Senate or the executive leadership, are in any position to understand the points that we are making. They're not smart enough. B, they've never had to like contend with the issues that I have to contend with, that you have to contend with. They've never really been in that position, like even AOC, like who was a bartender for a short period of time, is now wealthy beyond her wildest dreams, regardless of what she presents her salary as. She is not a
Yeah,
person of the people anymore. She has a campaign war chest in the millions of dollars. She makes a couple $100,000 a year, plus all of the money for serving on committees, plus all sorts of benefits and stuff like that. Like they're gone. Their
yeah.
connection to us is dissolved.
Maybe, but again, even like let's take like just a selfish point of view. Like they have to fix this problem. Well, they don't have to fix this problem. They have
Mhm.
to, because what ends up happening is that this happens sort of with like other issues too, like immigration. Is if they don't they feel like they need to fundraise off of blaming the other party for not fixing the problem,
Yeah.
rather than just stepping up and saying like, "Oh, we're gonna fix this." Because again, it's a great, just like immigration, like saving Social Security is a great fundraiser for Democrats and now Republicans, weirdly too. And they're like, like the other party, they're gonna take it away. Please give us money so that like we can stay in power, so like we can save your Social Security as it exists now. Again, not very appealing to me. Like to me, I look at that and I think the system's broken and that's a grift. You are scamming me, and off of not solving the problem.
Yeah.
But
They they are incentivized to solve nothing. Like Charlie
yeah,
Munger,
and
you get what you incentivize, and when you're incentivized to solve nothing, like you solve nothing. You constantly rehash old issues to abuse the people that you're supposed to serve, right? To abuse them into emotional responses from the people that you're supposed to serve. And that's the
yeah,
government that we have now. It's a kakistocracy, it's a kleptocracy, and it's an abusive ocracy. Like they abuse their constituents emotionally constantly.
right. Bit of gaslighting going on there, and I do think like the age thing is real. Like I think there are probably people who are younger are more it's serving in Congress, like are probably more understanding of like some of the issues that like I've raised about like not ever getting the benefit from this system in a way that I think even if they did ever get serious about this, which I have no I have no, I would not be surprised. I would be surprised if they ever did get serious. Like people like Donald Trump and Joe Biden, like A, they don't really need it. B, like they would benefit from the system anyway. And C, I think like again, a lot of the older folks are like, this works well enough for me. Why would I change it? Right. And those are
Sure.
the folks who turn out to vote the most. And
Well, the
as long as we
boomers have,
have like
yeah.
a generational wealth transfer that benefits the highest voting population, nothing's going to change.
Yeah. Yeah, no. I think that modern monetary theory, it suggests the possible solution, and that is to devalue Social Security benefits over the next few years in such a way that the benefit itself, as a real thing, even though the numbers will probably grow, becomes substantially smaller. Like your ability to purchase things with your $1,700 or $2,000 that will eventually get to will become substantially diminished, even at a make pretend 2% rate of inflation and a growing GDP. That
Yeah.
is the false promise of modern monetary theory. All of the politicians are trading on the lies of modern monetary theory. And that's going to be the solution that they go to, Kevin, right? More wars, more devaluation, more massive expenditures of wealth while pretending to grow the economy, which will in
Maybe. I
turn
mean, like
let
just
everyone buy less.
yeah. Just politically, I think that would be a losing solution. And I think they might like the people in power, Democrats and Republicans might do this, but unintentionally, right? But inflation, like as it hits, like you see it in the 2024 election, as you see like how inflation hurts someone like Joe Biden, right? Like because like his spending has caused prices to go up and other systems of people getting paid are in some cases unevenly at best catching up to that, right? And they're
Yeah.
seeing like they're paying more in the grocery stores, and that might be the single issue that makes Joe Biden lose despite how anyone feels about anything else he's doing, in the same way that that's how Jimmy Carter also lost. Like it did not matter anything else that Jimmy Carter was doing. People felt inflation and they wanted to change from that, right? And I
Uh,
know there are other issues with Jimmy Carter, but like
there
people
are.
felt inflation and that was like the thing
Whenever his
people were
name
thinking
comes up,
about.
it's like he was presented as the great hope for society, and he was a miserable, sad sack of a human being that like brought the like Ayatollah to power in Iran. Like this guy was not. He was not a
That sort of precedes him a bit, but
what's that?
I think Jimmy Carter kind of gets like a bad rap for some of this stuff. Like
Uh,
he deserves plenty of blame for a bunch of stuff, but I think that
What
in
would you blame
like
him for?
so I would blame him for the creation of the Department of Education.
Yeah,
Um,
that's fair because he did.
so but there are other things that he did do that I think were better. Like
All right,
The
so give him credit
deregulation of the
for
beer
something, and I'll see
industry.
if I can criticize it.
Deregulation of the beer industry.
Well, yeah, actually, that was
Deregulation of
beer
the
with the
airline
cake.
industry.
Yeah.
And like I get why it was politically non-viable, but like honestly, like him telling people to take responsibility as prices are rising and just like do other things to like put a sweater on. Like again, to me, like personal responsibility, I'm like, yeah, that's what you should do. And I know people were like, I want government to save me. I want like them to have the solution. Like, and it seems like he was like kind of passing the buck on that, but he was trying to do a bunch of other stuff. It
Okay.
wasn't effective. Like the gas price controls, that's
Yeah,
something I
but
blame
there
him
was
for.
a
It was
narrative behind him putting a sweater on, Kevin, that was patently false and fear-based. Like, that's the part where I felt like everybody missed it. He was participating in a fear-based narrative that literally as a kid, I was terrified of nuclear war. I was terrified of like we were going to freeze to death because we were going to run out of oil. And he capitalized on those fears. And I guess like I hated him for that, you know? So I hate is too strong of a word, like, but I was reacting to the fear-based narratives that were surrounding us everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. Like, I just, I mean, there was some like real stuff going on with, again, embargoes, and then like ways in which like different government systems made it worse with trying to control prices or to control, people's ability to be able to buy. And I know it's not like all on him, but
Sure.
I don't know, like it is a way to say like, hey, here's ways that you could take personal responsibility to do stuff, and I think that like some of that has been lost over time, right? Like when the government like says like, hey, like people need to take private actions to solve this problem that is bigger than the government's ability to solve it. It's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like you think about that again, the economics of World War II are complicated, but when you think about like World War II, like, hey, people should do things like have victory gardens and grow their own food and do their own thing. Like, I don't like mind that. I didn't like, I don't like the rationing. I think it was probably unnecessary.
Right.
And the market could have addressed like supply shortages based on like
Per not
the market's
controlling
ability.
prices, right?
Yeah, right, and,
Like
like,
it
that's what it is, like, but,
yeah.
like, I don't think it's a bad thing for the government to say, like, "Hey, you should take re like, we're going to do different things to try to get out of the way and or solve the problem, but, like, you also here's some ways you can take responsibility to do this on your own," right?
I
Um,
I I get that the government as an information clearinghouse has some appeal, but when we get into the information clearinghouse kind of thing, they tend to add an element of compulsion that I think you and I both agree, maybe not on the element of compulsion, but that the compulsion is bad if it exists, right? That's pretty circular, but
yeah, no, wait, the compulsion is bad. Well, like, we had this argument about COVID stuff, right? Like, to me, I'm like, government could have and should have just said like, "Hey, we're going to try to gather the best information possible from various sources and like make recommended actions," and I'm fine with that.
yeah,
They took it a step further and said, "And now we have X, Y, and Z mandates," right?
sure. And they
At different
included
levels.
race-based narratives and they included poverty-based narratives without solving any real problems that it was a manipulation too often. It was all too often a manipulation. I
Right.
felt.
And, that brings up like the problem comes when they misuse the advisory role too, which they can also do, right?
Yeah.
They can misuse it in a way that ends up being destructive as well. And again, same thing going back to the COVID narrative, like, you know, how the government would sometimes go beyond merely advising about stuff and then try to shut down information that ran contrary to whatever the government narrative was, and sometimes in ways that weren't true, right? Like there see this about like the COVID origin stuff. And like the extent to which things like masking were helpful in the beginning, right? Like
Yeah.
again, I know we're still like debating that, but like it was presented as a panacea option of like, hey, this will protect you. And then people engaged in reckless behavior, assuming a level of protection that did not exist, that was
Yeah.
beyond what actually existed for masking.
We have a comment from Twitter, and sometimes we get a decent amount of views on Twitter, but we don't very often get comments from Twitter. So I want to read one
Yeah,
from
go
the
ahead.
simple perspective, and it's about our Social Security discussion. From the simple perspective, employees have been contributing to Social Security fund bucket for many years. Government borrows against the bucket and pays back with inflated dollars. Millions of retirees and other payment recipients are dependent on Social Security, fixed without hurting payees and recipients. And I think that we got to a broad-based agreement about that would be, in an ideal world, the best way to do it. We run the risk of modern monetary theory being, used to handle it, and that's really the only solution that they're going to come up with right now. Hey, Shelley.
Yep. Thanks for joining the show, Shelley. And all the anonymous Facebook users out there.
Yeah, there is a bunch, and I'm pretty sure they're not exactly the same person. I know. I see Queeter
at least
mentioned that he was
Queeter and Brian, and there might be a couple others out there.
I'm going to assume that Cody Anderson comes in as pretty much anonymous regularly, so I think he might be one of them. Might have made a comment or two. I could see Cody Anderson being the guy that said we should, children are free labor, therefore breed more. That's how that had a distinct Cody Anderson.
We'll have to look it up.
Yeah, I will check it
out. So some of these are a lot of these are Queeter. Let's see.
Oh, it's not Cody. All right, fair enough. Could be Brian LaRusso. He's another funny one. When he gets wound up, we're gonna play a guessing game now.
But anyway, I think we should call it a day, though.
I agree.
Not Cody.
It's not me. Okay, fair enough.
All right, but thanks for joining us for this discussion. Really appreciate it. Have a great afternoon, folks.
Yeah, it's afternoon. It's weird. All right. Good night.